In our video on Nehru's foreign policy, we discussed how India-China relations deteriorated from 1955 to 1959 and ultimately resulted in the Sino Indian War in 1962. Today we are going to discuss this Sino Indian War. Let us first look at the situation prior to this war. On the eastern flank, India and China had a border dispute over McMahon Line. China considered it a legacy of British imperialism, while India considered it the international border. In 1958, map in China pictorial showed the borderline right across the Indian territory, violating the McMahon Line. On the western flank, there was a disputed territory of Aksai Chin. According to Johnson Line in 1865, Aksai Chin was a part of Kashmir. In 1956-57, China constructed a highway through Aksai Chin connecting Xinjiang and Tibet, which ran south of Johnson Line at many places. This road appeared in a map published in 1958. Here is the map showing disputed territory in red. The red part shown in the east is Nepha, or today's Arunachal Pradesh. The red part shown in the north of India is Aksai Chin. In 1958, the Khampas of eastern Tibet launched an armed uprising against the occupiers. After some initial successes, the revolt was put down by the Chinese. The reprisals which followed threatened to touch the Dalai Lama himself. In March 1959, when New Delhi agreed to grant him political asylum, he fled Lhasa under cover of darkness and with a small group of carefully chosen escorts. In 1959, India started sending Indian troops and border patrols into disputed areas. This program created both skirmishes and deteriorating relations between India and China. The aim of this policy was to create outposts behind advancing Chinese troops to interdict their supplies, forcing them north of the disputed line. Implementation of the forward policy was intended to provide evidence of Indian occupation in the previously unoccupied region through which Chinese troops had been advancing. In 1960, based on an agreement between Nehru and Zhou Enlai, officials from India and China held discussions in order to settle the boundary dispute. China and India disagreed on the major watershed that defined the boundary in the western sector. The Chinese statements with respect to their border claims often misrepresented the cited sources. Indian military on border was ill-equipped and outnumbered by the Chinese military. Further, there were differences between Defense Minister of India V.K. Krishna Menon and Military General Thimayya, who retired in 1961. On 3 October, Lieutenant General Umrao Singh, who had counselled prudence, was replaced as Corps Commander by B.M. Kaul, who had little experience in warfare. Moreover, the 4th Division, which was pulled out of Punjab and sent to Nepha under forward policy, was trained for tank warfare in plains. Now it would have to operate in a very different area. Overall, situation of Indian military was not good at all. With this background, the war commenced in the last quarter of 1962. On 8 September 1962, Chinese forces attacked Thagla Ridge and dislodged Indian troops, but this was taken as a minor incident. To dislodge the Chinese from Thagla, Indians now moved 2 battalions up from the plains. The troops had light arms and only 3 days of rations, no mortars or rocket launchers, and only promises that supplies would catch up with them. Indian soldiers reached Namkachu Valley on the afternoon of 9th October after a march through mud, mountains, and rain. That same evening, they set up a post in a herder's hut from where they would try to uproot the enemy after the arrival of reinforcements. They were not given the chance. On the morning of the 10th, the Chinese attacked. The Javans fought hard, but they had been drained by the long march up. They were also outnumbered and outgunned, their light arms proving no match to the heavy mortar used by the Chinese. On 20th October 1962, the Chinese People's Liberation Army launched two attacks, 1,000 kilometers apart. In the Western Theater, the PLA sought to expel Indian forces from the Cheap Chap Valley in Aksai Chin, while in the Eastern Theater, the PLA sought to capture both banks of the Namka Chui River. The Indians were taken by surprise as the Chinese quickly overran many positions, crossed the Namkachu Valley, and made for the monastery in Tawang. Another detachment made for the eastern part of Nefa. Chinese troops moved deeper and deeper into Indian territory. 8 posts were reported to have fallen in Ladakh, almost 20 in Nefa. Tawang itself had come under the control of the Chinese. On 24th October, the Chinese halted their advance, while Chow Enlai wrote to Nehru seeking a way to stop the border clashes and reopen border negotiations. 4 days of fighting were followed by a 3-week of lull. Chow ordered the troops to stop advancing as he attempted to negotiate with Nehru. Nehru's 27th October reply expressed interest in the restoration of peace and friendly relations and suggested a return to the boundary prior to 8 September 1962. He was categorically concerned about a mutual 20-kilometer withdrawal after 40 or 60 kilometers of blatant military aggression. The lull in fighting was broken by a second Chinese offensive on 15th November. A 500-mile front was attacked in Nefa. There was a bitter fight in Walang, where soldiers from Dogra and Kumaon regiments fought heroically and almost wrested control of a key ridge from the Chinese. But across most of Nefa, it had been a very poor show indeed. Here the Indians simply disintegrated, with platoons and even whole regiments retreating in disarray. The Chinese had occupied Tawang on 25th October. When they halted there, the Indians were deceived into inaction. In fact, the Chinese were working on improving the road to Se-La to gain strategic advantage. The PLA penetrated close to the outskirts of Tezpur, a major frontier town nearly 50 kilometers from the Assam Northeast Frontier Agency border. The local government ordered the evacuation of the civilians in Tezpur to the south of Brahmaputra River. All prisons were thrown open, and government officials who stayed behind destroyed Tezpur's currency reserves in anticipation of a Chinese advance. The administration had pulled back to Guwahati. An Indian reporter reaching Tezpur on 20th November found it a ghost town. Poised to enter the plains of Assam, the Chinese instead announced a unilateral ceasefire on 22nd November. In Nefa, they pulled back to north of the McMahon Line. In the Ladakh sector, they likewise retreated to positions they had held before the present hostilities began. Why did the Chinese pack up and go home? Some thought they were deterred from coming further by rallying of all parties, including communists, around the government. The Western powers had pledged support, and were already flying in arms and ammunition. The facts of nature are as important as these considerations of politics. For winter was setting in, and soon the Himalaya would be snowbound. And by pressing deep into India, the Chinese would make their supply lines longer and more difficult to maintain. Let us now discuss the repercussions of the war. The border war had underlined Chinese superiority in arms, communications, strategy, logistics, and planning. According to the defense minister's statistics, 1,383 Indian soldiers had been killed, 3,968 were taken prisoner, while 1,696 were still missing. These losses were small by the standards of the modern warfare. Yet, the war represented a massive defeat in the Indian imagination. The third five-year plan was badly affected and resources had to be diverted for defense. The military expenditure was increased significantly. As part of domestic politics, Congress lost three parliamentary by-elections in a row. In August 1963, Nehru faced the first no-confidence motion of his life. Nehru never really recovered from the blow, and his death in May 1964 was most likely hastened by it. Worse, at the pinnacle of his outstanding career, he had to face attacks from political opponents who would never have dared otherwise. Neville Maxwell claimed that the Indian role in international affairs after the border war was also greatly reduced. India's standing in the non-aligned movement suffered. 1965 war with Pakistan was also an indirect effect of Sino Indian War, as Pakistan thought that India was truly weakened. According to James Calvin, an analyst from the US Navy, India gained many benefits from the 1962 conflicts. This war united the country as never before. India retained 83,000 square kilometers of disputed territory, even if it felt that Nefa was hers all along. And finally, India recognized the serious weaknesses in its army. It more than doubled its military manpower in the next 2 years, and it worked hard to resolve the military's training and logistic problems to later become the third largest military in the world. India's efforts to improve its military posture significantly enhanced its army's capabilities and preparedness. This played a crucial role in subsequent wars against Pakistan. On China's part, it gained a firm control over the disputed territory of Aksai Chin, which seemed to be the prime objective of their attack. Geographically, Aksai Chin was easily accessible to the Chinese, but access from India, which meant negotiating the Karakoram Mountains, was much more difficult. Similarly, India and China are naturally separated by mountains running along the McMahon Line. Thus, current line of actual control acts as a natural border. In our next video, we will discuss the miscellaneous Nehru years from 1947 to 1964. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, share and comment because discussion is solution. For more discussions, please subscribe our channel.